November 7th, 1863. Sergeant Timoney walked up and down our line. He instructed us to stay low and prepare to engage the enemy. The earth shook suddenly from the concussion of the Parrott guns. Within our ranks, some cheered. Timoney quickly ordered us to shut our mouths. Lieutenant Greco approached our company and waited for a lull in the bombardment. "We'll be going up and over after the bombardment. The 119th will capture those works up ahead. Stay together and do not—" The Parrott guns fired another volley, deafening our entire company. Those guns did not relent. A strong gust of wind covered us with gun smoke. Max Todd had a sudden coughing fit, but Lieutenant Greco continued while the gunners were reloading. "Do not get lost. We have a lot of unstable ground to cover before we reach their trench, so stay with your NCOs. Good luck." We all nodded in agreement. Our lieutenant continued. "Fix bayonets!" The shrillness of the command straightened my spine with fear. I drew my blade and locked it into place at the end of my rifle. An orchestra of slinking and sliding metal rattled our ears. The tune was one of death, inviting everyone to consider the intimate nature of the murder we were about to commit. "Cold steel never fails, gents," Christian said, pondering our situation. The killing would not come yet. For 2 painful hours, the 119th waited in the sunken road as our cannons continued to bombard the rebels. The 6 main skirmishers ahead of us poked their heads above the embankment. Matthew, our new blonde-bearded friend from Maine, warned us to blouse our trousers. "There's a steep bank and a stream 30 yards ahead. When you rush out there, you're going to get wet." In a sarcastic tone, Drew complained. "Great! I'll have to keep my papers dry. What else must we expect up there?" Matthew peered his head above and studied the ground intently. "After the stream, you have about 400 yards of open ground. Freshly cut tree stumps are everywhere." Without hesitation, James interrupted. "Hey, Drew and Martino, try not to twist your ankle up there." Matthew laughed with us and continued. "After that, there's a moat." "A moat?" cried Wilson LeCount. "Are we storming the walls of Jerusalem?" "No," Christian piped up. "Jerusalem had tigers." Wilson's father, Chuck, laughed nervously. "And beyond that?" Matthew clenched his rifle and rattled it towards us. "Louisiana's finest bunch of traitors and degenerates." Jory poked his head up. "Louisiana, you say?" He glanced at Christian and continued. "We're fighting Confederate papists. I forgot that this species existed until now." James rolled his eyes, then turned towards Martino. "Behind them must be the river, right, Corporal?" "That sounds correct." Martino withdrew his ramrod and slammed it down into the barrel of his rifle. A clear pinging sound that sounded that the gun was clean and ready for use. Others began checking their rifles for fouling. Jory swallowed a mouthful from his canteen. "I would rather get killed inside the moat. It would be a fitting tribute to my European ancestors, who were probably killed in similar ways, fighting great medieval battles." There was a sharp laugh from James. "You wish they died that way. I bet they were so annoying that they were beaten to death in dungeons." Mickens rolled his trousers up from his shoes and pulled his homespun green stockings up as high as he could. He tucked his pant legs into his mother's socks, as Matthew suggested he should do. "This isn't the siege of Constantinople. Besides, Those rebels have nowhere to run if we break 'em." Martino was unbuckling the flap of his cartridge box. "That sounds about right. They will fight us fiercely. Let us count on those parrots." Drew was readjusting his belt to fit tightly above his belly for easy access to his cap box. "Those artillerymen better hit their targets." Everyone in our line was preparing their equipment and clothing for the trek we were about to make. Bedroll belts were tightened, belts buckled, and shoes tied tightly. Each man maneuvered their shoulder straps comfortably so they could use the full range of their arms. Keith secured his kepi low above his eyebrows. His optimism sickened James, who could not bear to see the serenity on Keith's face. For this entire interlude, the Parrott guns continued to blast away at the Confederate trenches. The thunder simply never ceased. The 6th Maine was summoned with a bugle call. Matthew tightly gripped his rifle. "Nice talking to you, city boys." After wishing him luck, Matthew exhaled and climbed over the swell. He disappeared towards the rebel line. We could only use our ears to track our new friend, as the Portlanders were ordered into skirmish formation. Lieutenant Greco ordered our line to move forward to the edge of the swell. Eagerly, everyone peeked their head above to witness the attack. Here, we had our first good look at the rebel trenches. There were 2 imposing obstacles that made the assault challenging. First, the ground was very tenuous. This was apparent as we watched the 6th Maine march forward. Their extended line dipped out of sight into a sunken stream. Soon enough, the Maine boys reemerged soaking wet. With 400 yards remaining, the Portlanders had to cross open ground littered with freshly cut tree stumps. The timber acquired was used to strengthen the second imposing obstacle to our advance: well-entrenched defenders. The Louisiana state flag fluttered in the strong winds, indicating that we were certainly combating Confederate Catholics. Surprisingly, these defenders did not return fire. Instead, Louisiana was preoccupied with finding shelter from our unrelenting Parrott guns. Unsurprisingly, that was considered a larger threat than the line of Federal skirmishers marching towards them. Temporarily ignoring this threat proved to be a gross miscalculation of their foe. Instead of posting as skirmishers like we expected, the bugler of the 6th Maine sounded the charge. Abandoning their marching pace, Maine moved in a full sprint forward across the 400 yards of open ground. Lines of blue surged ahead around the tree stumps like a stream through rocky boulders. The unsuspecting Confederates had to quickly reorient their line to meet this new threat. The Louisiana flag was moving into position, indicating that the defenders were just as shocked as we were at the sixth's resolve. With fists clenched, Jory growled, "Come on, Portland, get 'em!" Other affirmations were followed, but they were hushed and personal. Every man was invested in their attack. The rebel response would indicate the severity of the maelstrom we would have to traverse. Each eye was peeled on the battle. The swiftness of the Louisiana state flag marked that the Confederates had shifted their line with great discipline, despite the explosive shells all around them. Our Parrott guns were making great work out of the defenders when they fled their shelter to meet the Portlanders. The cracking bursts propelled dirt, blood, and pieces of Confederates into the sky. We watched them fall with macabre fascination. Their flag stood tall. Meanwhile, the Maine regiment made it across the first 200 yards completely unscathed. A frightening cadence of blood-curdling huzzas came from their throats as they rapidly closed the distance. Fooling the Louisianans bought them time. And, unfortunately, time had run out. Just before reaching the moat, Confederate soldiers fired directly onto the oncoming Portlanders. At this range, the force of the Minnie balls tore off limbs and mangled flesh beyond recognition. Members of the 6th Maine were literally pulled apart when hit with multiple rounds. Some of them tumbled into the moat, escaping our gaze. Others were forced back, bouncing off the tree stumps like rag dolls. For a moment, Maine disappeared into the moat. We craned our necks to get a better perspective. Confederate gun smoke blanketed the evacuation. Confederate gun smoke blanketed the excavation, completely masking our view. Splinter stood up with his rifle in hand. Where did they go? He was quickly dragged down by Sergeant Timoney. The gunfire ceased. Our cannons fell silent. A horrible cacophony took its place in our ears. It erupted from the trenches. The sound of a great and terrible beast. The cessation of shooting only meant that a violent melee was underway. Clashing, screaming, and stabbing roared in our ears. The low gray smoke obscured the graphic display from us, as if God himself tried to shield the little shred of innocence we had left. A strong gust of wind challenged our sensibilities and uncovered silhouettes of murder. It was like a magic lantern show of death. In short order, the gun smoke completely dissipated. A ghastly sight that was the first of its kind in the war met our eyes. Hundreds of men in blue and gray were brawling on top of the breastworks. Maine men were throwing Confederates into the moat with their bare hands. Bayonets were plunged into unsuspecting combatants, making the strongest of men occupied in desperate action crumble into a weakened heap. Nobody in our company had witnessed hand-to-hand fighting until now. Watching grown men punching, scratching, and clubbing each other to death exalted our willingness to act. Death dealt by men from a distance with powder and shot is impersonal and random. Instead, we saw human beings desperately act to save their own lives. It was heart-wrenching and indescribable. This horror continued until the momentum of the 6th Maine chased the Confederates back. The star-spangled banner was frantically waved on top of the trench with such force it indicated a desperate struggle. Help was needed. Sensing our excitement, Lieutenant Greco drew his sword. Stay calm, 119th! Again, Splinter stood up. This time he began crawling up the embankment. Sergeant Timoney came sprinting from the rear with a booming yell. Get the hell down, you goddamn Republican bastard! Timoney made an example of Splinter to remind our company to maintain order. Compelled to act his rank, Corporal Martino swore at Splinter as well. I'm going to tuck your rear end inside of your feet! Our lieutenant's order was very difficult to follow because we were compelled to remain in safety as our Portlander friends were fighting for their lives. Distant shooting recommenced as the 6th Maine advanced into the rebel works. Smoke billowed up from this embankment, where so many were left to die, bleeding out from their wounds. Our attention was so focused on Maine that we neglected to acknowledge that the 5th Wisconsin on our left was already halfway to the rebel line. The milkmaids, in their fervor, were ordered forward to come to the aid of their 3rd Brigade fellows. They gave a monstrous yell that only Midwesterners could deliver. James punched the air with a manly shout. Give it to them, Wisconsin! They were arriving just in time, too. Outnumbered, the 6th Maine were scattering back to the moat, using the craters and ledge for cover. Men grabbed as many of their wounded laying on top of the berm and tossed them down into safety. The Louisiana regiments, recovering from the initial shock of Maine's unexpected assault, delivered a punishing counterattack. Diving for shelter, the Portlanders made themselves scarce with every pounding rebel volley. The sheet of fire kicked up dirt and slammed into those who poked their heads up. The thunderous sound of coordinated fire came from the rebel position every quarter minute. The ground below us had a definitive pulse. The concussion of each professional volley was death itself, taking the lives of our Portlanders with every breath. A brief silence broke the deadly cadence. A distant bugle performed with a timbre that sounded unlike any of our musicians. The sky opened up with a piercing rebel yell. The hoots and yips of their battle cry was the only sign of them we had. "The rebels," Jordan Shiro said. "They're coming again." Gunsmoke enclosed the engagement from our sight. Swirling fumes of plaster-colored clouds told of Louisiana's strength. Inside the mire shrieked the oncoming rebels. The tenacity of their war cry only reminded us of the cold southern steel that was about to collide into our friends. Everyone had faith in our brigade. They would hold the line. Maine wouldn't give up that easily. Wisconsin wouldn't let them. The Midwesterners ran straight into the smoke, letting their bayonets direct them into the fearful unknown. Lieutenant Greco stood up from behind our line. "Attention, company! Rise! Shoulder! Arms!" We stood up for the first time in 2 hours. Knees buckled and cracked, but everyone snapped to attention. Corporal Martino gazed towards Drew. He patted Drew's chest. "Hey, do you have your play secured? It would be a shame to lose it." A nervous Drew jumped and swore. With a laughing sigh, he responded, "I wish I could just publish the damn thing." For now, I stuck it up my jacksie. Jory rolled his eyes with sharp sarcasm. "The Welsh are all the same." Lieutenant Greco drew his sword and bellowed a command. "Attention, company!" Everyone stood erect and snapped out of their distractions. A fierce wind gusted into our faces, watering my eyes. Death was in the air. The smoke masking the rebel trenches finally cleared. Mounds of dead and dying alongside the moat doubled, revealing the gruesome aftermath of a desperate fight. Scores of dying Maine and Wisconsin men stained the moat wall red with blood. "Where are they?" whispered Drew. "Where did Wisconsin and Maine go?" The crashing of volleys and gunfire recommenced from behind the rebel trenches. Our brigade had repelled the Confederate counterattack. This realization developed across our minds. Jack Sorensen lifted his slouch cap into the air. "Give them hell, boys! We're coming!" "Quiet in the ranks!" Lieutenant Greco barked. Sergeant Timoney paced up and down our line, cursing our mothers for spawning disobedient children. Suddenly, horses galloped hard to our left. It was General Russell and his staff coming down the road. He halted behind the 49th Pennsylvania. Lieutenant Greco was summoned by Captain Brown to come to his side. Everyone glanced over to see the leader of the 3rd Brigade himself. Something significant was about to occur. Did he want the 49th and 119th Pennsylvania to rush in? Company A was ready to move. At the shoulder arms, everyone eagerly awaited the order. In an instant, curses were muttered up and down the line. Christian urgently pointed towards the Confederate trenches. "Wisconsin and Maine are being pushed back!" Splinter gripped his rifle and shook it with frustration. "It's another rebel counterattack!" Once again, Louisiana was reinforced. Individuals from both Maine and Wisconsin were participating in a fighting retreat. Pulling back towards the moat, some of them tripped over the corpses, which lined the top of the breastworks. In short order, the tide of the battle was turning against the 3rd Brigade. George glanced backwards to measure his proximity to Sergeant Timony. Bending downwards, he whispered towards us. "I see old man Russell has come to get us, and on a horse as well." George was immediately interrupted with the bugle for charge.